Hello, I'm Scott Crawford. This July 26th marks the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, a broad civil rights law that seeks to integrate people of all abilities into the mainstream of society. It is to the disability community what the Emancipation Proclamation is to African Americans. For those of you unfamiliar, ADA defines disability as a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. At any given time, disability affects 1 in 4 Americans, but in Mississippi, that rate is 1 in 3. Yet, it's important to remember that over a lifetime, most of us will experience some kind of limiting condition. So, ADA protects nearly everyone. This year, we remember the leaders who fought so hard in the 1970s and 80s to make ADA a reality, and those who continue the struggle to bring its promise of equity and inclusion to everyone. This summer, we particularly want to recognize the ongoing struggle to end systemic racism in our country. Disability knows no boundaries, and we acknowledge all those people who are multiply marginalized. We join our siblings of color as they speak out against racial injustice and their demand for respect and equity in all aspects of life. Indeed, Black lives do matter. It was July 26, 1990, when President George Herbert Walker Bush famously said, "Let the shameful wall of exclusion finally come tumbling down." 30 years have passed now, and there's been some progress, but it hasn't come easily, and here in Mississippi, often not willingly. People with disabilities still struggle to live in the communities of their choice. And those that do manage to live outside an institution often have difficulty finding accessible, affordable, and integrated housing. ADA is a good law, but it isn't perfect. It's merely what we could get past. One area in which it is sorely lacking is the requirements for accessible housing. It's often left to the person to make the necessary home modifications. Imagine trying to make your house wheelchair accessible in a matter of days, knowing that's all the time you have before being discharged from the hospital. Even if one manages to modify one's home, getting out and participating in life is a daunting challenge. We are literally out of sight, out of mind. The independent living movement has several mantras. One is educate or litigate. Obviously, we prefer the former, and most of us spend our time trying to convince community leaders that ADA improves the lives of everyone by removing barriers and creating universally welcoming spaces. But this common sense law is all too often seen as merely a financial burden. And officials ignore regulations or exploit loopholes to evade adherence. This is particularly notable in the area of streets and sidewalks, in which we often resurface streets, making them better for motorists, while doing nothing to make the sidewalks safe and accessible for pedestrians, disproportionately impacting people with lower incomes, older adults, and the mobility impaired. More than a decade ago, my colleagues and I had to sue in federal court just to access public transportation here in Jackson, the capital city. We still can't board aircraft in our wheelchairs, and many won't even fit in the cargo holds. Imagine wanting to travel but having to leave your legs at home. 30 years into ADA, that's what we live with. This kind of short-sightedness only delays the kind of inclusive society called for by our country's original motto, E pluribus unum, out of many, one. The other mantra I want to share is, nothing about us without us. When designing programs, services, and facilities, it's always best to consult with people in the disability community. We can help avoid mistakes and find innovative approaches that go beyond the mere compliance with the letter of a regulation and move towards true inclusion. It's always better to do the right thing the first time than explain why we didn't. 30 years on, the Americans with Disabilities Act remains an unfulfilled promise. It often falls on lay people like myself to enforce the law. I try to live by the principles: silence is complicity, and if you see something, say something. But given the lack of adherence in so many areas, the fact that I can't leave my house without encountering reportable barriers, it is exhausting, both physically and emotionally, to document every last problem I encounter. So I encourage everyone to get involved, to take a stand for inclusion, to use your voice. The words of Martin Luther King Jr. echo in my mind. In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. To the next generation, I say, don't take ADA for granted. It's up to you to continue the struggle, to make it a reality. Get involved, push for adherence, hold your leaders accountable, and most importantly, remember the words of Justin Dart. Vote like your life depends on it, because it does. Happy anniversary, ADA. May your promise of a truly welcoming society someday be realized.